All right, welcome back to the fourth episode here in our live audit series where we are auditing GMX Key, which is a product by Key Finance, which essentially makes escrow GMX and multiplier points liquid, sort of similar to a convex-like solution for GMX rewards. And in this series, we have been auditing the LP staker contract, which incentivizes liquidity providers to actually provide liquidity for GMX Key and MP Key and allow those to actually be liquid. So last time in episode 3, we started to really dig in and we got some interesting findings by examining some edge cases in the Uniswap staker and also some interesting sort of reentrancy attack vectors and things like this. And we tried to sort of twist a lot of attacks and see if we could get some unexpected behavior in the contracts. A lot of them didn't work out, but a couple of them did. And in this episode, we're going to basically continue that and start to examine these things, go back and look at our initial audit tags and start to close out those audit tags and really complete any open questions that we had or any interesting attack ideas that we had and sort of reevaluate those now that we have a greater understanding of the system as a whole. And again, my name is Owen. Over a year and a half ago, I founded Guardian Audits, and ever since then, we've uncovered dozens upon dozens of critical and high vulnerabilities from auditing over 100 smart contracts. And my goal with all of the videos that I put out, and especially this series, is to distill down everything I've learned about the auditing process, everything I've learned about finding bugs and vulnerabilities, and give it to you so that you can ultimately become a much better auditor than I ever could be. All right, with all of that out of the way, let's just dive right into episode 4. All right, great. So in this final episode of our live audit series, now we're going to start basically diving in. We're going to continue to twist things and see if we can find some new vulnerabilities or any new findings like that. And we're going to start closing out our audit tags and revisiting all of our audit tags and sort of resolving them now that we understand how the system works, as you know, we have a more high level view of how the system is actually functioning. And really quickly, I wanted to address the high impact issue that we did find last time, which I actually discussed with the team. And they actually said that the way that they intend to use the system is such that they would never let a key end per se before everybody has been unstaked, right? So what did they mean by that? They mean that when you unstake, right, when we're actually doing the exploit, which is to unstake for somebody else, it has to be before the key is over, right? Now, they're saying that they expect to unstake for everybody who's staked before the incentive key is over here. And that's possible if the admin address comes and adds a new incentive key. Now, of course, it gets a little tricky here when you're talking about timing these new incentive keys. You have to make sure that there's, ample time between the new incentive key being added and the old one ending, right? Because as soon as this block.timestamp becomes less than the end time for the key, then that's when this attack is going to become viable. And anybody's going to be able to unstake for others and then essentially steal their rewards if they do some sort of intelligent back running or something like this, front running, whatever. And so that does mitigate the issue, but at a contract level, the risk still, of course, exists. So they have a way to address it, and they have a plan to address it, which is fantastic. Good on the team for recognizing this edge case. But of course, there is that inherent risk that should be reported in an audit report. So this is a finding that will be included in the report, but they actually have a plan in place to avoid such a scenario. So with that said, with that out of the way, let us start off by honestly, let's just walk through our audit tags and let's start to essentially reconsider them, and basically we'll just go one by one and work through them. So I'm going to we'll start with the top, which I believe is this comment about fee on transfer tokens. This reward token is not going to be a fee on transfer token. So this is, maybe it might be worth a low to point out. So maybe I'll just add low here and we will get that added to the report. But the reward token is not going to be a fee on transfer token. So let's see. We've got this next one. And then of course, so this is something we already addressed, which is what yielded that previous finding. And then, okay, this is a good one here. Let's see. Right. So previously we just added this tag that literally just said this is sus because we didn't immediately understand this and we didn't want to get caught up on it. We wanted to get a more higher level view of the system. So we just left a tag for us to come back and address it later. So that's exactly what we're doing now. So I guess I'm interested, when could the index even be this? And it looks like we're looping back around. So when could the current index even be the max? Can you even increment that high? Because if I remember, yes, this is only 5,200 and the max for this is going to be a lot greater, something like, I think like 50,000 or something like this, perhaps even larger. So let's see. I'm going to go through and we'll see how current index is used. I want to see how it gets incremented. I think it's got to be the only place it could be incremented. Okay, we're not changing it there. Yeah. And then, so in the constructor, interestingly, we set it to the max. Then, okay, so what happens when I stake? Because this will only get set to 0. Or set to 1 to be, or yes, indeed set to 0. Okay, so set to 0 here. Only after we set the current incentive key. So when there is no incentive key, when one doesn't exist, yes, when no incentive key exists, that's when we're going to be at this max. So let's see. Let's just say I stake. I assume it's going to simply revert because, yeah, anytime you try to access current index, yes, which makes sense. So for example, if I deposit and I try to stake, and we're going to call, so when you do deposit, then you're going to end up calling the on ERC 721 received. Here's what's going to happen. At some point, we're going to attempt to get, or we ought to, we give it the current index. Let's see. Interesting. And then, so the staked index, this might be lost. This might be bad actually. So let's see. So here's where we do the transfer from. Oh, okay. But then, so I was thinking we would be able to errantly set this to where this would be the max for that UINT 16, and this would be as well. And then, of course, that would be very bad to have that set in the staked index. But I believe, so when we go and do this, this is going to revert, right? So it's actually kind of, it's very cunning, actually, because when this is this max value here, is basically shutting the system down for deposits, right? You can't deposit when it is the max, which makes sense. You don't want to be able to deposit when there isn't a current incentive key. Yes, and that's the only way you're getting something into the system and staking in this LP staker is by sending an ERC 721 here, and so there's no way around that. It can only accept Uni v3 positions when the current index is not the max, right? And the current index, as soon as you add that first incentive key, it becomes 0. So yes, this makes sense. Okay, so we can close this audit tag out. Let's move to the next one. This is, yes, we addressed this. Anyone can extend staking, right? So let's just have a look. We get the current incentive key, then we stake. Now, what if this is outdated for whatever reason? Let's say the admin hasn't added a new one in a while, which of course they shouldn't be doing that. But so if this was outdated, if it was ended, I assume it would just revert if we're talking about staking. So yeah, so it will revert here if it's an outdated one. That's fine. The last gets updated to the current index. Again, the front running case let's think about front running when somebody like when you claim rewards or something like this, the key count, if you claim rewards, if you had a key count, yeah, it doesn't seem very high impact, but you could slightly, so this one, only the message sender can do this. Yeah, I don't see a huge impact at all from this, especially since it is only the key count. It might be something for contracts building on top of the system to consider. If for some reason the key count was important to that contract that's building on top of that contract's accounting, then it could be manipulated by, front running it with extend or unstake for that person. And then you could get an unexpected result here. But in terms of the rewards that you actually end up drawing, if you only expected to unstake the first 3 and collect those rewards specifically, of course you could get front run and they could extend staking, they could unstake, and these are going to compound your rewards for you. You're going to end up getting more rewards than you expected, and you're also going to end up unstaking for keys that you didn't expect to unstake for. But in terms of this system specifically and people interacting with this as EOAs, that ought to be fine. It only compounds their rewards. It doesn't make them lose any rewards. So I'd say that may be a low. It may be a low finding to note that. So we'll just write here low to front run and manipulate applies to contracts building on top. Just something to note, some really more of an informational finding, something to watch out for people building on top of this. Okay, so we've just got a gas. I'm going to leave gas things in here and then those will be added to the report. Okay, so we've got the loop. Let me just make sure we haven't missed any. Thus far, it looks like we're good there. This had better be fully updated by now. Yes, well, so when we talk about, yeah, because we're withdrawing, so it had better. Now we're going to be unstaking all of them. And as we know, this should, right, we get the last incremented by 1 so that we actually hit everything, even the current. Then we go here, ignore this. We unstake for everything along the way. So the only way this wouldn't hold is if somehow the first was here and you excluded something that is still staked over here, but as we've seen thus far, that doesn't seem to be possible, as the constraints on first are such that you can only increment first by 1 here. Let's think about this case. So it's only when the first is less than the last, of course. So if they're the same, you certainly don't want first to go over last. It is interesting because, okay, so it's less than, let's say this is 0, and then this one is 1. If it is less than, then you put it so where this one is 1, this one is 1. If there are 1, 1, then you don't do this. And that's somewhat interesting, because then you would be, so for key. Okay, so you're getting the key. This is the key that's going to be from that first, the current first, right? Because we incremented it in the previous. Then we're encoding it and sending it to, we're getting, yeah, and then we unstake it only if it exists. This seems like it ought to be fine. This does mean we should be deleting it when we withdraw, and I do think we are. Yes. The only way you can unstake for the current is, I believe, through withdrawal. Let's see, because you can unstake token once, and it's got to be the first. The first has to be less than the current. Okay, so you cannot unstake the current here, and of course you can't do it here, because again, we can verify we get the exclusive last index, which is the last plus 1, and then we require the current index to be, if it is less than, then we cap it, and this is the exclusive last index, so it will not include that. Okay. So if we go back to that audit tag we were looking into, let's see where we were. Okay, right here, we are confident in this. Okay, here's a gas. we did close out this for entrancy. We only really got a medium sort of unexpected behavior, risk for anybody building on top of this, risk for front ends, and really just an unexpected contract state. That's where we ended on that. Okay, then this is a valid concern that everything is when not paused, which is of course settable by the admin. So of course the admin can really cause some grief here, because this is when not paused, claiming rewards is when not paused, collecting fees is when not paused. And so yeah, this is a good consideration, something that should absolutely be called out in the report, that, you know, this is a risk when anybody's interacting with the system, especially if the admin, it's not even that the team themselves could be perpetrating such a attack. It's a risk if the contract could be, or if the admin address can be hacked, basically, if it could be compromised, right? So this should certainly be a multi-sig that is secure, and definitely not any sort of hot wallet or anything like that, because it basically holds the keys to all of these people's LP positions. So you can easily lock them in there. So that's certainly a good call out. Okay, then we need to think about this case here. Right, so we're claiming all rewards, and for each token, okay, so we get the key. This is the current key. If the small gas optimization, we don't necessarily need to make this comparison every time, right? But of course, we're not really focused on, you know, super hyper optimization here, so we'll just move on. So basically, if the key is still active, if this incentive key is still active, then we do this where we get the staked index for the token. And if the key count is greater than the range, so that means, so the key count is used when we unstake all, right? And this is where we're compounding all rewards. So we compound all rewards. And I think this one is not exclusive of the current. Let's see. This one will actually let you unstake. So it's the last plus one. So there's no consideration for the current. And then we go to this function. And the only constriction here is the key count. But then, so this if statement is saying, if the key count is non-restrictive, right? So this is the range, and then the comparison here is the range, essentially, because this is the last plus one. It's interesting, this one is the last plus one greater than the key count, and then this becomes the first plus the key count. So let's say that basically adds one to this left side, which would make you enter this condition when this could not be non-restrictive, but then I think that works out because and then you just make it the first plus the key count. Let's see, but then in this comparison here, this is straight up the range. Let's see, so this is the range when the key count is greater than the range versus when the key count is less than the range plus one. So I think this works out. It's like isomorphic almost, I'm thinking. So then like the negation of this is less than equal to, right? And when we're talking about the negation of this, we are really talking about going into this loop. So from a high level, key count being greater than the range, this is saying non-restrictive. This if case here, this is restrictive, so this is the negation of that. But of course, the negation of that is greater than equal to, but we have this plus one. And the thing that the plus one does is, if we removed the plus one, if this was just the range, then this works. But then when we add one to here, it would be greater than, only greater than, strictly greater than. Right, let me just make sure I'm thinking about that right. Yes, it would make it strictly greater than. Okay, so that works. That is the negation there. So in that case, right, we said this is when the key count is non-restrictive. So when it's non-restrictive, that means that we do unstake for the current index, which means So when we unstake for that current index, we grab the rewards for that current index and we compound them and claim them, pull them into this contract for this token ID. Then we stake the token again, right? Yes. And so we need to restake the token because of course you would want to still be claiming rewards, but in this case you get to claim from that current incentive because you unstaked it and compounded it here. That's what this is doing, right? Okay, great. So we can close this one out and let's see. Use message sender here, yeah. And then also you could do the transfer ones, just gas optimizations. Let's see. We'll look again. See what we have. Validate that the key here always corresponds with the first, right? Because we're always peeling off the first one. And then this is a note on the same thing. The first here could be something that the staker didn't explicitly, that's actually a different note that we'll have to think about, but okay. I believe we did validate this, but let's go back and just be sure. So the key that's passed in here should always be the first, right? So let's see, key here, first index, right? That's infallible incentive keys at the index I. So the first is going to get iterated on in line with I, okay? You know, it's almost like you don't even need I. Yeah, it's like you don't even need I, but sure. Okay, so, and then this is just a declaration of that. Okay, so I'm going to close this out. First here could be something that the staker didn't explicitly stake for. Now, what do I mean by this? We're saying that this first, we're going to increment it by 1, right? When you just increment it by 1, you assume that this was staked for that, but that's not necessarily true, right? So the workflow that it looks like so let's say I staked for the 0th, the very first incentive key, and then they come along, they add a first, the second, which is at the first index, gets stored right here. Now the current index is 1. I have not staked for that until either I call extend staking or somebody else calls it for me. Or somebody else could call this, extend it and unstake the previous. Oh, really quickly, what does this do when it's the max? Okay, so the exclusive index is already restrictive to the current, okay. So that doesn't matter. As we were saying, what were we saying? Okay, we were basically saying, yeah, I haven't necessarily staked for the very next incentive key until somebody calls that for me, so we have a case where you're not necessarily staked, but the thing is when you unstake, you query it and it's like, okay, do we have liquidity? Have we staked for this key? And if we did, great, we'll unstake and claim reward. But if we didn't, then that's fine, we just skip it. So that ought to be safe. So we're gonna go find that tag. Key here, not necessarily the current index. Okay, and then this is something that we just wanted to understand what the withdraw token was doing. And then, yeah, this is just a suggestion here to perhaps send this directly to the message sender, define a to. They could possibly make this a little bit more composable for people building on top. But okay, so we've closed out basically all of our tags here. We did make some over here. Position with 0 liquidity. Let's see, a position with 0 liquidity. I don't think you're going to be able to, yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, it just reverts. What if I could stake for another key outside of the GMX key system? That's right, because, let's see. What if I could stake for another key outside of the GMX key system? This is interesting because then you wouldn't be able to withdraw. But see, to stake, you have to be the owner. So you would have to be able to do that through the GMX key system. You'd have to be able to stake for a key that is not accounted for in this contract. And I don't see a way of doing that. You would have to be able to get again, like we were talking about, either the latest on your staked indexes, either the previous doesn't include something you're actually staked for over here, or the latest doesn't include something you're actually staked for over here, which we verified the previous, or the first is what I'm referring to. We verified that correctly increments by 1 every time you unstake something that you're not staked for. I wonder, so there's an interesting case here in collect fee where we get that staked, we reset the staked index to current index. But the thing is, we always unstake token, and this, at this point, this must be zeroed out. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to withdraw. So really, you're asking yourself, how are we going to be able to unstake but have this actually leave stake? And we're not allowed to get here because that would invalidate this. And I'm not seeing a way for that to be possible. This would be a good thing to fuzz, and something we'll probably end up fuzzing this particular thing to check against all different scenarios. And again, perhaps there's, perhaps there could be, but I don't think there is. Actually, I'm pretty confident there isn't a scenario where, since we have our reentrancy here, then we know we can get these redeposited and sort of make the staked index something from the fresh deposit. We could get the staked index to be this fresh thing here. Then it's inaccurate at this time, but that's literally right before we delete it. And so there's not really an opportunity there, especially because everything else is non-reentrant, and you'd only be able to basically hurt yourself. So that's going to be fine. Let's just have a quick look at all the different cases where we're going to edit that staked index, right? So let's see rights to this. So first of all, we know this is sort of paradoxical. You can't really get here unless it's already, if it was already broken, you couldn't get here. Okay, so the question is, so you unstake all, it would have to be clean. You would have to actually not be unstaking for anything for this to go through, and then, so that, we can safely ignore that. So let's see. So here we're reading, and then we do that. We're deleting, of course, when we withdraw. We're reading again. Here's the last. Oh, this is, okay. We're just storing stuff here. Okay, cool. Where are the rights? Here we go. Here's a right. That's the first. And the last is only when we stake token, right? So when you stake token immediately, now you're going to be considering all the ones in between. But of course, we already went through that with this, so that's fine. So the last becomes the current every time you stake. Yeah, and there's no way you're going to be able to stake for something and not have it accounted for in the last, because this is the only way you're going to stake token through this, and you must be staking through this. This is literally the only call. So yeah, that ought to be fine. There ought to be no way, and again, we're definitely going to fuzz this to be sure, but it seems there's no way to get out of that, so that holds. Yeah, so staking for another key outside, you'd have to be the LP staker to get it into the system and stake for that key, but there's no way to stake for a key that isn't added by the admin here. Although, what if you could stake for an index that isn't initialized? But the thing is, I believe every time they access the keys, they use the current index, which the current index, of course, you can't do anything when it's not. And then it only gets incremented to something new when there absolutely is something there, and that is the key that is being added. So let's just see. Yeah, I suppose I wanted to see where incentive keys were written, but that's really just going to be in this function. Only way to add an incentive key, yeah. Okay, so that is fundamentally got to be safe. I don't see a way to access an index that is with a non-initialized incentive key, right? Because these are literally updated in sync. This is set to the index when this is set to the index, right? Okay, so like we said, we really don't see a way to stake for another key outside of this the LP staker system. If we could, that would be pretty bad. I assume it would only be bad for us though, because I mean, if I could stake for somebody else, of course, but I really don't think that is going to be possible. But yeah, you could get a LP locked in here because you can only withdraw when everything has been unstaked. So we're going to close this one out, and then we'll look at this as a final comment. Anyone can call. That's right. That's right. And that's basically the one that we got a case out of. And so that is basically going to do it. We've basically just gone through and closed out all of the audit tags that we've made here as we were initially going through and looking into things. We found some cool findings, some interesting edge cases. And now at this point, it's just going to be a continuation of going back through, doing a few more passes and just trying out more edge cases like we've been doing, thinking about, oh, like what if I provide 0 for like the key count or something like this. That might be an interesting edge case to look into. But now in the audit, as we continue, this is going to be our last episode that's recorded. But as we continue to do this audit, we're going to be looking at things like that. And we're going to get this passed off to the team and see if we can't uncover anything that was not already found in this series here. And you can see all of the final findings and the final report. I'll make sure to list that in the description so you can actually go and see what was the final outcome of this live auditing series and this particular contract. What were, if we found anything from fuzzing tests we're going to do, or if anything came up from the team. Of course, I could have entirely missed some stuff. That's why I always preach having other people looking at the code, verifying you, validating your findings, and also validating that you didn't miss anything, of course, because it's entirely possible that we have missed a critical vulnerability here. So that's what we're going to be continuing to look for as we pass it off to the rest of our team here. And we'll see. You'll be able to see in the report if there was, in fact, any other critical vulnerabilities or high impact vulnerabilities that we end up finding. So that's going to do it all for this episode and this mini series on this particular live audit. I really hope that you got absolutely the most out of it. I hope that you saw, the system that we're using here, where we identify what are the high level things that we need to understand, and then we go through and we're adding these audit tags, we're writing down things that we think of as we go, and then sort of walking through and validating those after we get the full context of the system. I hope that you can take this sort of process and take how I'm thinking about these things and apply it to your own process so that you can ultimately become a much better auditor than I ever could be, right? Great, so that's all I have for this time. I can't wait to see you in the next one.